And we're live.
Awesome.
So, welcome everyone. Let's see. Hello, Anya. Hello, Moritz. How are you doing tonight? How is the evening going for everyone? John from Seattle. Hello, Suzanne. Where are you from? Some people from Madrid, from Portugal. Nice to see everyone. Quite a mixed audience from everywhere. From Berlin and Hamburg. It's nice to see. James will love some people from the UK.
Awesome.
Hello, Rich. Let's wait a couple of more minutes for everyone to join. The chat is already getting busy. Montreal. Hello, Scott. Maybe I can already start with some of the housekeeping rules. I think quite some people have joined already. So it's good to know that this webinar will be recorded. We will share the recording of the webinar the day afterwards. And if you want to ask any questions, you can use the chat function, and we will also have a poll function that you can use to submit answers. We will have a longer conversation, and then at the end we will host some Q&A session, and James and Chris will try to answer your questions. Let me see for the poll. So to get a bit of a better understanding of the audience here, we have created a small poll to see what your knowledge is on internal platforms and internal platform teams. So let me publish this one quickly. So you will have 5 answers to pick from. If you click on the polls tab on the bottom, on the top right. Okay, I see some people already voting. That's nice. If you don't see the poll window, just ask. So the possible answers are: we have a dedicated internal platform team. The team is a side hustle of some of our DevOps. We're starting to build our platform team. We would like to have a platform team in the future. And what is an internal platform team? If you would like to learn more about the topic. So 23% of the audience has voted. Too quick. Oh, the poll is already closed. It is.
Sorry, that might have been me. Was it?
It's open again, I think.
Sorry.
Let me check. Answer 1 went as default. Okay, so at the moment, most people have answered we're starting to build our own platform team. So that's good for this topic. Okay, we'll take that feedback. Thank you, Geert. Maybe we closed the poll a bit too early. All right, shall we get started, guys? Are you ready? So go ahead, I would say.
Okay. So thank you very much, Michele, for kicking us off here. So I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Chris. I am the CTO here at Humanitec. So Humanitec is the quickest platform to build your internal developer platform, which is, I guess, a little bit on topic for this webinar. But I'm very pleased and excited to have James Wynn here, who is hopefully going to be our expert on actually building out the platform team itself. So James, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. As Chris says, I'm James Wynn. I'm CTO of Expert Thinking. So Expert Thinking are a professional services consultancy based in the UK. We specialize in helping clients across the UK and Europe in adopting cloud native technologies and data at scale. In terms of my background per se, I started out my career as a software developer, moved through various infrastructure roles after that, and I've kind of spent the last sort of decade, I would say, as an independent consultant in the platform engineering and agile software delivery space. So yeah, excited to join you guys here tonight.
Great. So the topic we're going to talk about today is about the challenge of building an internal platform team. And so from the polls, I think it looks like a lot of people are already on that journey, but there's a few people who are maybe less familiar with it. So it might be a good idea maybe to kick off, James, with what is your definition of an internal platform and what is an internal platform team?
Okay, so yeah, in terms of an internal platform, in my eyes, it's essentially the infrastructure on which ideas and business value is formed. It's a collection of tools and infrastructure basically that facilitates development. An internal platform team, well, this varies on definition depending on how big your organization is, but essentially it's a team that are responsible for mapping that product, the platform as a product, to actual business value and ensuring it aligns with the requirements of development teams.
Yep. That sounds like a pretty good definition. So I think the key point there is development teams as the kind of client of the platform and the platform team, and the platform team really serving the developers. So looking at it from a kind of perspective of, you've heard about internal platforms and internal platform teams. Why should someone, or why should a company invest the time and effort in actually building or establishing an internal platform team?
So I think the reasons are tenfold, really. So it's the first thing is it's a mistake to view the platform as essentially a cost center or an enabler that just enables that development. It's part of the bigger picture. Now, in today's age, companies are becoming increasingly reliant on delivering value to their customers digitally. So the platform is an integral component to that. So it's kind of like, why would you invest on new software features? It becomes aligned to that sort of question. So I think it's really important to realize the value of the platform, and that's to give the developers the tools that they need to do their jobs, right? So without a platform team who can map those two things together, then developers are only semi-productive, if at best. At worst, they're not productive at all. They're focusing on all the things that they should be focusing on.
I really like that comparison you made with investing in software features versus investing in kind of the infrastructure you're running on. One of the things I've often heard about, and actually this is kind of my philosophy as well, is that the platform and the platform team should think of themselves not as an extension of the ops team or an extension of maybe an SRE function of some sort, but actually as their own product team, really serving customers who are developers inside the organization. So do you have any kind of other thoughts around kind of the thinking of it as a product and how the relationship actually works with the operational side if you have this kind of internal product team delivering to developers?
Yeah, absolutely. So the product mindset, it really is key to the success of an internal platform. Without it, what ends up happening is essentially teams will focus on stuff because it's cool, okay? Not necessarily because it's what will provide business value. So we always need to default back to the reasons and why we're doing things and have that mapped to actual outcomes. So the product mindset is essentially key to that. Okay, we need to drill that philosophy right the way through any value stream within the business, not just the platform stream, but any value stream without the business.
And picking up that kind of operational part, because obviously a product team is generally focused on kind of delivering to the end customer, but a platform team also has its foot in very much in the operational space. You're dealing with infrastructure, you're dealing with dev tooling, you're dealing with even things like reliability of the systems you're actually building.
Yeah.
How can teams think about structuring themselves so that they can both work like an agile product team, but at the same time don't leave the kind of operational stuff hanging or become an increasing load on the presumably already stretched ops team?
Yeah, so it's seeing how these are things all intertwine and align. So it's really important to realize that it is a complete zero-sum game when we're talking about focusing on things like technical debt versus features, platform features. The goal of the platform team is to enable developers do their jobs, right? If the platform is unstable, the developer productivity drops, okay? If we're not able to release features at the pace in which development teams require them, again, productivity drops. So it's always tying back to actually the reason why we have a platform. And the operation side of things is just as important as the feature generation. I think it's having that single pane of glass across the above and realizing when to turn the dials up and down on each of those sort of those flow items, if you like.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. I think it's the classic kind of prioritization problem here. And I think when you're starting to think about prioritization, part of what is important is also thinking about the value. So I know from the poll, a lot of people are in the process of setting up their own internal platform teams. And maybe this has been a bit of a struggle from a kind of organizational perspective, because you need to sell in the idea of having a platform team, and maybe especially more kind of traditional IT organizations. This is not something which necessarily makes a lot of sense, because it's effectively throwing a load of effort which doesn't have any direct impact on the end customers, even though it'll improve development processes inside. So thinking about that and thinking about the value add, what are some kind of ways of thinking about selling the idea of an internal platform team and maybe defining value that you can then build a business case on to actually pitch it internally in your own organization?
Yeah, so I would start off with countering the statement that it doesn't have an impact on the end customers. Okay, so let's hypothesize and say that we actually have no digital assets that we share with customers. Okay, the point's still valid that we have back office systems, things like that, which will have an indirect on the bottom line, if you like. So I think it's key to drive out that mentality from the business and actually realize that our existence as a business and our competitiveness does really rely on our ability to adopt digitally. So that would be the first the first pushback on that statement. In terms of selling into the business, again, it's about really understanding the problem we're trying to solve. Okay, so we as a consultancy and myself individually, I've witnessed it many times where you go to an organization and they've jumped on this cloud bandwagon because it's the cool thing to do. They've seen other organizations, competitors move into cloud, and they want a piece of the action, right? And the due diligence sometimes stops there. Okay, so they stand up a team. A team starts with the kind of build it, they will come mentality. Okay, and what happens is it becomes tech driven, which is a mistake, because that results in low adoption of the platform. It's not really solving a problem that exists within the organization necessarily. So my advice to that would be essentially the practice of standing up a center of excellence, if you like, identifying use cases within the organization where the platform could be developed to make a real difference, and work with those application teams to define the initial MVP, if you like. Okay, so you'll notice in terms of the language we're using, we're going back to the product mindset, and it really is key in making this work. And it's working with the teams and having that short feedback loop to make sure the platforms continuously develop with a vision in mind. So having that vision of what is this that we're building, why, and where do we want to get to? What is the problem we're solving?
Yeah, so I think that iteration thing is really important. It's very easy to, as you say, go off and build something and say, this is amazing. If only people tried it out, they think it's incredible. But I think there's a certain amount of feedback required in that loop, as you say, like tight iteration, and a lot of it can be quantified in terms of metrics. So the classic one are things like mean time to delivery, or the kind of change failure rate and so on, which are kind of standard DevOps metrics, which developer platforms and developer platform teams can have a big impact on. Any other thoughts around metrics that we could use to measure our progress and prove that we're making an impact to developer teams?
Yeah, absolutely. So the DORA metrics, which you mentioned there, are a great place to start. So things like change failure rate, the mean time to recovery, deployment frequency. It's important not to get boiled down to those because they can be somewhat proxy metrics at the same time. So they're really good metrics for illustrating the performance of the platform. But when we're talking business value, it doesn't necessarily translate. Okay, so let me put that into context. So deployment frequency, for example. Okay, so we can see how that impacts the developers' workflows and things like that. But at the business level, we don't know the value of those deployments. Okay, so there's kind of business level metrics that can be considered as well. And an example of one we've used quite recently in helping an organization really understand the value being derived from the platform was mean time to productivity. So by that, what we mean is the time for onboarding an application team to the platform, and for those guys to actually be producing value against their core deliverables. Now, that value might just be testing a hypothesis. It might be actually releasing a feature to a customer. That the definition of value at that point can vary, but we found that's a really good metric, at least for the business to understand the value that the platform's delivering.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting piece there, because that's something which is super easy to measure before and after the introduction of a platform, and is something which you can obviously keep tracking on a kind of monthly basis, for example.
Yeah.
And I think that onboarding bit is something which a lot of dev teams will kind of accept as lost time. So if you bring a new dev onto a team, you say, well, you're not going to be productive for at least a month while you learn all the tools and while you go through the process once and all that kind of thing. And it doesn't really have to be the case. And especially in larger teams where you have internal mobility, you can imagine repeating that even with someone who's worked at the company for a number of years. If you switch teams, there's always new processes and new approaches, and you still have that kind of cost of time to productivity, as you say. So I think that's a really interesting metric, and providing that language to throw back to business as well is a really nice way of thinking about it. So yeah, go ahead.
What's really interesting as well is the standard DORA metrics, which we discussed first. What you notice is a correlation between improving those and monitoring those, tracking and making changes to improve them across the line has a direct correlation with that metric that the business understands as well.
Yeah, so I think the key point here is, in terms of kind of putting it back to where we started off the selling into the business and really defining value, is really understanding what language the business speaks, what drives the business decisions in order to get that investment for building out a platform team. Yeah,
definitely. And yeah, that's just one example of one of the metrics we've used previously to do that. There's a lot of, again, it's really having those core understanding of why the business is looking at that in the first place, to your point.
So let's kind of move on here. So assuming we've already pitched the idea, we've got management buy-in for building our internal platform team, and we've started off. How do we think about kind of the next step? So you've got adoption, maybe a couple of dev teams are on, you're making progress, people really like it. How do we think about scaling, for example, across more technologies, or alternatively across more teams? How does that work? How do we grow or scale our internal platform teams?
Yeah, so I guess it depends on the size of the organization. One example of something we did a few years back now with a large government organization in the UK was, well, you can imagine the department. It was kind of, there was over 100 application teams, right? It was a big platform, and the platform team essentially was very limited. It was viewed as a cost center, okay, which is, we can talk about that later, but that is not a great start and not something you want to do for obvious reasons. But basically the long and short of it is adding more resource simply was not possible. So what we had to do essentially was take a step back from that, okay, and really standardize on our platform, how we built it. Okay, so I'm talking the creation of modules and essentially a development framework around those infrastructure components, which we could then share with the rest of the organization. Okay, and the way we really scaled to deliver the features at the rate in which they were requested without adding resource to the team was by allowing development teams to then do PRs into that core code base, and the platform team just essentially served as an audit function, sanity checking, and we moved to an SRE capability where the platform team was focused on the stability rather than dealing with this endless amount of new features that come in, and they basically just sanity checked those PRs, merged them in, and it was good to go. So that's how we really solved the problem there. And what we seen was the team happiness across the organization increased tenfold because developers weren't relying on the platform team to essentially build a new feature from scratch. All they need to do was do the PR and have them review it, and maybe some testing and sanity checking, but that was it. The rate in which the platform features were developed increased exponentially, as you can imagine. Give people the keys, they will build what they need and contribute back to the platform. But also we've seen that feedback loop between development teams and the platform team just disappear. It was so short whereby the platform was no longer a black box. Okay, the wider organization really understood at that point how the platform worked, and I think it really created a culture where the whole organization was collaborative around that point.
I think that's a really, really interesting approach. And actually it chimes with my experience as well. In a previous life, actually as a product manager of a platform team at Google, we had a similar approach where we would basically encourage the engineering teams that were using our platform to submit functionality as they brought it in, and we would integrate it and actually build out and kind of add it in, extending the platform kind of organically. Yeah. And I think if you can afford that as an organization, it definitely works, both for adoption and also ensuring relevance, that you stay relevant going forward.
Definitely, it keeps the platform aligned with serving the developers, right? Then development teams are not going to develop features that are no use to them, right? It ensures that alignment without us having to constantly be reviewing development requirements, things like that. So it's quite a powerful way of doing things. Obviously, the organization has to change its mindset somewhat. Silos have to be completely broken down. You have to really standardize on how you do things, so it's easy for someone from the outside to pick it up. But if you do that right, it's really powerful.
So I think that's a really interesting point about that standardization. One of the risks of an internal development platform is it potentially becomes a bottleneck rather than kind of opening up opportunities, and finding that balance about kind of freedom versus structure. Yeah. To give everyone the best situation possible is obviously a compromise. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I believe you can have both. So when starting to think about how we approach developing a new platform, I like to think of it with the mindset of batteries included, but extendable. Okay, so what I mean by that is any functionality we release, okay, comes with sensible defaults. Okay, but we need to be mindful of why we're delivering that feature, and that is essentially to make the development teams more productive and delivering value. So it should be extendable, pluggable, configurable by developers. Yeah, I get what you're saying. There is a fine line. So there's a fine line between it's kind of the governance aspect of it. But if we think about things pragmatically and work collaboratively as an organization, we can circumcise that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and it's about that collaboration. And I think as well, if we go back to your previous point about bringing in other teams, so like dev teams are contributing to the platform, then you will naturally avoid a lot of these problems, which I think makes sense. So if we kind of take it kind of fully back to the start, so we've kind of taken a trip through internal development platforms, maybe in terms of focusing on the team itself, what are some kind of do's and don'ts for, I don't know, the team makeup, how you actually structure them, what part of the organization does it report into, and so on. What are your thoughts around that?
So this one varies massively depending on the size of the organization. Okay, so even if we're talking about a very small organization that only has a few digital products, this responsibility, rather than a team, I like to call it a capability, and it's for that reason, right? In a small organization, it doesn't necessarily warrant a full team. Okay, but I think what's always consistent across organizations, regardless of the size, is the need for a a product owner for the platform, someone who really owns the platform and aligns the backlog and the roadmap essentially with the desired business outcomes for that. I think that's really key. Moving into bigger organizations, I think in terms of the engineering capability, I think it's important to have a healthy mix of people from both infrastructure backgrounds and development backgrounds. Okay, let's remember the goal of this platform is to make development teams as efficient as possible. Best way to do that is have people who understand that workflow, okay, who understand the pain points when trying to consume an internal platform that is essentially a black box, okay. So I think that's really, really important, having a healthy mix of people with different ideas, right, from different paradigms. And yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that blind spots question of like, if you have a room full of ops people, they'll be blind to the devs requirements. If you have a room full of dev people, they'll be blind to the ops requirements. I think that's very key. And actually blending those together is kind of the key of a successful platform team. And I think in summary, you could just basically say it's not a one size fits all world in terms of that. There's certain amounts of kind of compromises, and different companies will have different priorities as to what they want to get out of a platform team and what they'll want from a platform itself.
Absolutely.
That's great. So I think we're kind of at time for our chat, but I can see that there's been a lot of questions that have been asked already in the webinar. Michiel has been very kindly fishing them out of the chat for us. What have you got for us, Michiel?
I have. Let me ask the first question that Sergio asked. So he asked us how you balance developers trying out new tools and wanting to integrate new tools to the internal team versus having a fixed set of tools for the developer team. So maybe James, do you have experience on how you set policies on integrating new tools?
Yeah, so actually, I should have mentioned this before. So when we talked about the government organization, we helped scale their platform team and build out the platform like that. One of the key tenets of being able to allow that contribution back to the platform was first making sure we had policy in place. So in that particular scenario, we used Azure policy, okay? And actually part of the definition of merging a new feature into the platform was removing the limitation on that feature within Azure policy. Okay, so you've got to have secure guardrails around that when you're doing that. So yeah, there's a fine balance there. But in terms of developers coming up with tools where you've already got a tool set, in my experience, most of the time when that occurs, it's because the developers do not know that tool is available to them, or they do not know that aligns with the functionality they're seeking, or it can be a misunderstanding from the platform side, from what actually value they seek from that tool. Okay, so collaboration is key in that aspect.
Okay, interesting. Maybe we can also tackle the question that came in the chat from Oscar. So how would you manage teams that work in silos? Do they form a bottleneck, and are they responsible for the platform?
So removing bottleneck, again, it's all about cross communication, right? And you really do this from the beginning, okay? Before we do anything, we really start finding out the problems we're trying to solve. And the first part of that is breaking down those silos and saying, look, guys, what is your pain point? How can we help you? What is the problem with the current platform that you're using? Okay, so what you'll find is the more and more we do that and service developers' needs, those silos just completely break down. And if they're not breaking down, then I would argue that us as a platform team are not doing our jobs to align those things correctly.
Right. Okay.
So if I can jump in there, I think there's actually an advantage to having that platform team, just as you say about the job, is actually to be the broker between the silos. So as a platform team, you have permission to talk to everybody, be it devs, be it your network admins, be it the guy who jealously guards his databases, whoever it is, you have permission to talk to these people and actually can bring them together. And if you buy them into the platform, then you have a kind of a forum for discussion, and you're automatically breaking down silos in that way.
Definitely, yeah. And it's interesting because the more and more you have these conversations, you realize the initial requirements may not be what is actually required. Okay, whereas if we remain in those silos and throw requirements over the fence, we end up delivering things that provide no value. So yeah, that's really, really key, Chris.
Okay. So then Mohamed asked about if a platform team requires any specific skill set from engineers. You've already mentioned you want like a nice balance, but is there anything specific that works or that is required?
I guess it depends on the problem we're solving, right? I think it's more key that people have the right mindset. Okay. The technology changes at an exponential rate. We all know this. We all work in the industry, right? And we all know how to learn. What is key is being able to see this for what it is, and that is a product that provides value to the business and how we go about that.
So I would actually add to that and say there is a special skill set you need, and that is you need to be a strong product-focused engineers. So the platform team is not an excuse to kind of go in and hack bash scripts and pull together bits and pieces of pipelines and kind of like crank something out that just about works. You need the same quality and same diligence that you would have building any kind of enterprise system. There's no shortcut. So the special skill is you need to be a good product team, a good product engineering team.
Right.
Absolutely. Great point.
Maybe also a question like, do you need to be a great communicator because you're like in the middle of everyone, you're in the middle of engineering teams, in the middle of the ops team?
I think the reality is communication is always key. Okay, the better we communicate, the better we solve problems. Okay, the more minds that's actively collaborating on a problem, the better the solution we always come up with. That is key, in fact. In terms of the communication across teams, it depends what role we're fulfilling in the team. If we're in a larger platform team and we have that platform product owner, okay,
Right.
the responsibility to align those things lies with the product owner per se. So there's less of a requirement there, but collaboration is always key, in my opinion.
Okay, makes sense.
As someone who's done that role of being the product owner for an internal platform team, I would say that this is actually a very interesting role, and has a lot of surprising depth to it, because you're going to be talking to both engineering teams as customers. You're also going to be talking to business teams behind those engineering teams as customers, and also you're going to be in what is generally a very technical product, right? There's all of these elements, and then you also need to think about this as a user. So that product role needs to span sort of understanding things like consumer tech. So how do we make a good UI for people to interact with, whether that's a GUI or whether that's a command line tool or whether that's an API? You need to be able to speak to that space, but you also need to be able to speak Terraform scripts to engineers. You need to be able to talk to businesses about how they can improve their business velocity through improving technology. So that role, like, we kind of gloss over it as product owner for the platform, but that's actually a really crucial role. And actually, if we go back to our previous question about specialist skill sets, that is a very important role to fill and get the right kind of person in that position.
Just to elaborate on that as well, if we don't get that position right, it is often the failure of a platform. We see because what we get is a misalignment between the business outcomes that are desired and what's actually being delivered at the platform, and prioritize it at a platform level. So that role is really key to the success of a platform and the adoption of the platform. Okay, because at the end of the day, if we're not releasing the things that give value to our customers being internal, business, whatever you like, then people will simply not adopt the platform. And I've actually seen this in organizations where it gets to the point where we've built this nice funky platform over here, but actually development teams are spinning up their own infrastructure because frankly what's being built over here isn't what's required by these guys. So that role is really key to the success of the platform.
Right. There's an interesting question from Renato. So to continue with it, like, do we have like specific composition for the platform team? You already mentioned like a nice balance, but can you add something to this?
I think so. Basically, what I said, it's having people that understand the entire end to end of that the value stream. Okay, so it's understand people who understand it from a development team point of view. Okay, and what the pain points can be there, but it's also understanding people from the infrastructure side that really understand the solution to those problems in an infra layer. I think that mix of skills is really important. Exact composition,
It's hard.
Yeah, it's kind of finger in the air, I guess, and see what works. But I think it's more about having the range.
Right. Okay. Then a nice one from Moritz, maybe. If you can share your experience regarding the migration path to a platform team, like what techniques did work, or like any tips you can share.
Again, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but it's really that shift to a product mindset. It's moving away from the project view of the world, okay, and really moving towards that product mindset, having that continuous iteration cycle where we're really understanding the value that's being pulled from the platform, really identifying the pain points, and constantly reviewing our platform metrics as well to see where we can improve.
Right.
And I'd also throw in there, there's not just platform metrics. One of the things that's often overlooked by internal teams in all sorts, like whether you're building an internal developer platform or whether you're building an internal time tracking application, is user testing. So you wouldn't think twice about not user testing your public facing applications, but do the same on your internal platform. So that's a really good way of both ensuring you're solving the right problem, but also getting feedback. Because if you sit next to a developer who's attempting to perform a task and they're getting frustrated, then you have immediate feedback that maybe what you're doing isn't quite as good as what you thought it was.
Yeah.
Right. Then Renato also asked a question about how you track your roadmap or your goals, and if you even maybe like craft a roadmap for your internal platform team, and if you leave time for other tasks like assistance to other teams.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of a roadmap, I think this is really key. We do this consistently whenever we help organizations create an internal platform. It's not only basically collaborating with the dev teams to really understand what the requirements are, but it's also publishing that roadmap so it's publicly available. And when I mean public, I don't mean to the rest of the world. I mean public to the organization. So that should be continuously in sight. 2 reasons. Okay, so the first reason is so teams can actively track when new features and items will be available. Okay, and second of all, it also provides that reference point to make sure that what we have in the roadmap still aligned with what we require. Okay, it's that reference point that we need to continuously refer to make sure that we're aligned.
Right. Then a longer question from Patrick. I will read it out. He's a product owner of a DevOps platform team, and he wants to empower development teams to become part of their DevOps team. And they have like shared libraries, reusable pipelines, and so they have a separate operations team. He asks if this team can like stay a separate team, and also the same for the team that focuses on servers and storage and network. Do they live within the platform team, or can they be standalone?
It massively depends on the organization, but I think they should always be as close as possible. Okay, I won't say that they should be embedded. Okay, but there should be clear communication paths between those teams. They shouldn't be operating in silos. But that's not just true for operations versus DevOps teams. That's true for any team within the organization.
Okay.
And I would think one of the things is, as this role as the product owner, it's kind of your job to build those bridges and make sure that you are talking to the storage team, you are talking to the network team, and bringing them in and showing them the value of what you're doing. And there's many things that an internal developer platform can give those teams, which they may not realize upfront. The main one is allowing developers to self-serve things. So if the storage team has to deal with a whole load of tickets for stuff coming in for what is effectively handle turning work, if that can get into the platform and they can support that, then they can get on and actually look at more interesting stuff than just kind of provisioning storage when a developer needs new storage in their Kubernetes cluster or whatever it is. That's actually some value which you can go and sell into those teams. And then they might say, this is worth us spending time contributing back to you in order to actually build out this functionality.
All right. Then Renato is asking about success metrics and how you can measure the success of your platform team. He's trying to measure this through the robustness of his solution and also the adoption rate. And he asks if you have any thoughts on this one.
Adoption rate is, like we discussed before, not just the rate of people trying to adopt the platform, but the rate in which they become productive on the platform. Okay, because remember that those are two different things. We can have an application team come tomorrow to our platform, okay, but they may not be productive because half the features that they require aren't yet available. All they have is a namespace in a Kubernetes cluster. It really defining adoption. But I think adoption's a really good place to start. Because it really ties back to the business outcomes, the desired outcomes. Things like rate of adoption, mean time to productivity, these are all great places to start that speak to business stakeholders.
Right. And Mohammed is also asking about what about on-call teams for the platform team, if I understand the question correctly?
What about them? Sorry,
if you would have an on-call team for your internal team. Oh wait, am I reading it wrong? Any concerns or insights from the on-call process of the functional team? Sorry, he meant the platform team.
So in terms of the platform, it all boils down to the business's KPIs, right? And what kind of applications and things we're serving on the platform. But as a general rule of thumb, there will be an on-call capability for revenue generating platforms.
Right.
I think I give a kind of concrete answer there as well, is that fundamentally the developer platform shouldn't be your infrastructure. Like those are separate concerns. So you should already have an on-call team looking after your infrastructure to make sure things are going down. But the developer platform is mainly about developer productivity. So if developer productivity is important to you, and presumably it is because you've set up an internal platform team, then it really matters when your developers are productive. So for example, if all of your developers are in a couple of time zones, maybe you're all based in the US or you're all based in Europe, then your on-call team only needs to work whatever office hours you're running. If you have developers around the world across every time zone and you have people regularly working at the weekends, so for example, maybe a production outage would require developers to come in at 3 o'clock on a Saturday morning to fix an issue, then your platform needs to be up and running, because you don't want to be the reason why a production outage caused problems down the line. So in terms of revenue generation, the platform doesn't generate revenue, but it could be a dependency on a revenue generating application, in which case you need to think about that. Just
to add to that as well. So what we found in various places where we've implemented an on-call requirement is you see a masked improvement of the quality in terms of what we deliver as a platform team, because nobody wants to be called out at 1 a.m. on a Saturday morning, right? So it's the kind of you build it, you run it mentality. Okay, so we're all accountable for things for that. But you're absolutely right in what you say, and Chris, and that's the separation of concerns. And it all boils down to how your organization's structured in terms of your internal platform team versus your operations team, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. A question a bit earlier in the chat from John. He mentions that for an organization that lacks good developer discipline and has mostly junior developers, what is a good first step to show the value of investing into an internal platform? I assume it's showing the value against management or a developer lead.
So I can jump into that one maybe.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think this is a very common situation people find themselves in. You have relatively junior engineers because it's much easier to hire junior engineers into a team, and so maybe you don't have that seniority of that depth of experience in your development teams as they move forward. So on paper, this is an ideal scenario to actually have an internal developer platform, because you'll hopefully, as James mentioned before, have those guardrails to make sure that we do the right things and we don't end up with like 50 different bits of shiny tech that everyone's trying out in order to try and solve the problem, but we kind of standardize and bring things together. But on the other hand, maybe those sort of organizations can be very difficult to build an internal platform team, because you need that depth, again, as James said, of people that have actually been there and done that. They understand the pain points of developers and they understand the pain points of these operation teams. And I think actually this is an interesting position where it may actually be interested in looking at something as a kind of build versus buy decision. So in those scenarios, it might be better to actually buy something off the shelf. So you can go all in on, say, a PaaS solution. So you could be saying, well, in that case, if we go for something like Heroku, we know that we're going to put the guardrails in. We know that we're going to get a lot of the benefits and use Heroku as our internal developer platform. Or if you're a bit more mature in your setup or Heroku's not a good fit, you could look at, for example, something like Humanitech, which can provide that kind of structure for you out of the box and be something that you can adopt straight away and get that benefit from kind of day one without building up the team. And then you can build up a team around it and you can extend it and develop it and so forward. So there are other ways of getting into this. And I wouldn't try and focus on following maybe the same line that a large, well-established development organization will follow. If you're in a kind of more junior position, like you can be more tactical about these things as well.
Okay. And then I think this will be the last question for this webinar. Renato linked to Mohammed's question, do you actually run production load services from your platform teams? Maybe Chris or James?
Yes.
You do.
I was going to ask to repeat the question, but you must have heard it because you go for it, mate. Sorry.
Yeah, so the question is about, do you actually run production load through your development platform teams? And the answer is is yes. I mean, fundamentally, if you're not using your internal development platform to do everything that would be needed to do your development, then you've effectively built two platforms, because you have one for your production system and you have one for your developers, which is never going to end well, because as we all know, if you have different systems in production to in development, then guarantees that things are going to break when you move to production.
Yeah, the single path alive.
All right, that's going to be then the last question for this webinar. I'll have to thank the chat for being such engaging listeners and askers, and we will also send the recording tomorrow, so you can rewatch all the questions. And if you have any further questions, feel free to send them via our Slack channel or directly via our contact form, and then we can follow up individually. Thank you, James. Thank you, Chris, for being here and presenting this topic to us this evening.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's been fun.
Great. So I guess we'll see you all later.
See you later. Thank you.